In this episode of Who's Been Sleeping in My House, I've got a mysterious case of hubble, bubble, toil and trouble, with tales of gypsy rituals.
We understand that it was used for seances and all sorts of things down there.
And a mystical healer.
He was sort of the spin doctor of his era.
I faced one of my toughest assignments yet.
Oh my goodness. Ian, what is this ungodly liquid supposed to do?
I'm Adam Ford. Using my skills as an archaeologist, I'll uncover the extraordinary histories that live between the bricks and mortar of homes across Australia. I'll unearth stories not recorded in the history books and answer the question, who's been sleeping in my house?
I'm in Adelaide's Square Mile. It's in the centre of the city and it's a masterstroke of early town planning that once defined Australia's first free settlement. And the house I'm heading towards is caught between the suburbs and the city and has a history that's been influenced by both of them. Well, I wasn't expecting this. I'm in quite a commercial part of Adelaide here, but this is a beautiful Victorian mansion. And it looks like it's got a shop front down below. It's a bit of a puzzle. We'll talk about wearing its past on its sleeve. This plaque says it was a former chemist shop and that it was once owned by an Afghani herbalist and that it was also a gypsy tavern. Really?
This cosmopolitan cauldron, aptly named Alchemy, is home to civil servants Lois Boswell and Donald Frater.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, I'm Lois. Nice to meet
Adam.
you.
Nice to meet you.
Sorry, Adam, Don.
Don, come in. Lovely place. Well, this is unexpected. I mean, from the outside, it's this large 19th century shop. But in here, it's this beautiful 21st century home.
Modern house.
Yeah.
Lois, Don and their two children, Alan and Jacinta, only moved in last year. But from the moment they saw it, they felt a special bond with the building.
Within 30 seconds of looking at the outside, we knew that this was the house that we wanted to be in.
You get this feeling that there were things here before. The fact the floorboards don't all match, it sort of speaks to you a little bit. It feels like it's got a really big history.
Do you know how old it is?
We think it was built around the 1880s.
And looking at that blue plaque out there, it looks like there's been some interesting characters who've lived in these spaces too.
Indeed, we're fascinated by that.
Do you know much more about the names on there?
We understand that there was a Muslim herbalist, and he sounds like a very interesting character. They talk about him as colourful. What that means, I'm not sure, but it'd be really good to find out.
There is a singer there, but I haven't been able to find anything about her.
Sydney Cooper. Is it her or him? We're not sure.
It was her. We love the building, but we would like to know more about what the basis of the history is so that we can understand it and explain it to other people as well.
Oh, wow.
Lois and Donald also want me to investigate rumours that they've heard about strange gypsy goings-on down in the cellar.
Yeah, what a nice cellar. Looks like you don't mind your wine either, do you?
No, we're very South Australian.
And so, what's the story of the cellar?
We understand that it was used during the tavern days for seances and all sorts of things carried on down there.
I mean, is that what they do in gypsy taverns? I haven't a clue, really.
Well, we know they had dancing and singing because some of the people that have gone past the house have told us about those.
Well, that I can understand. That does fit with my mental image of the Roma people and enjoying a song and a dance. But, yeah, fascinating part to your house. I can't wait to look into this.
There's one other mystery the couple want me to look into. They're puzzled about how grand their place looks compared to the rest of the buildings on the street.
We wondered whether it was part of a main street and there were other shops just like it all around, and they've slowly gone and this is what remains, because now it's surrounded by factories.
It's like a reverse gentrification, isn't it? I mean, there are other buildings, obviously, that look of similar era.
And they look like they were, yet again, shop fronts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it might have all been shops, but we really don't know.
It would be fascinating to see what it looked like in its heyday, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Absolutely.
A house with a sense of history is such a wonderful thing to have and to live in. Because it's a shop front, you get lots of people looking in and wanting to peer in through the windows. I need to know what excites so many people when they go past the property like this place.
Lois and Donald have heard so many stories about their new home. I want to help them understand it, separate fact from fiction, and get to the bottom of what's on that plaque. Who was Muhammad Alum? Did the gypsies hold rituals in the cellar? And why is this house the most ornate on the street? I'm going to start my investigation with the mysterious Muhammad Alum. I'm assuming if he warrants a listing on the plaque, he should be well documented.
Well, this information's gold, and it gives a bit of a biography of Muhammad. And it states that he was born in Kandahar in Afghanistan and moved to Australia sometime in the late 1880s. The fascinating thing is, he moved straight to the Western Australian goldfields.
Not exactly a stepping stone into the world of medicine. Almost 50 years after arriving in Australia, Alum finally settles in Adelaide. In 1932, he buys what is now Don and Lois's home and starts his herbalist practice. He seems to have become a miracle healer, with the newspapers hailing him as the uncrowned King of Adelaide, a man who despises riches, that he may help and heal the poor, curing thousands whom doctors declared doomed.
The question is, how did an Afghan cameleer then become this miracle healer?
As I research further, the mystery deepens. I found conflicting material which portrays Muhammad Alum in a totally different light.
Well, now I'm properly confused. I've got a document here from the police that describes Muhammad in very damning terms as a gambling house tout, a notorious liar, and even a slimy, suspicious individual. I mean, it's difficult to think that these are written about the same person. But it's clear that I'm going to have to dig a lot deeper to find the real Muhammad Alum.
I'm now turning my attention back to the house and the neighbourhood. Lois and Don are curious to know what their street looked like when their house was built, and whether their handsome home was once part of an upmarket shopping district. I'm hoping Julie Collins, an architectural researcher, has some answers.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for coming to see me. The owners of the house think that it was built in about the 1880s. What was this area like at that time?
Well, it certainly wasn't an affluent area. It was a working class area with workers' cottages. People around this area would have had occupations like bootmakers and blacksmiths. smiths, dressmakers perhaps. They were certainly working, and they were probably the working poor, as we'd call them today. There were workers' cottages in the side streets, and that building there would have stood out as being one of the most grand ones on the street. It must have cost an absolute fortune to build back then. The fact that it had stonework, the fact that it had cast iron work really marked it out as something special. There wouldn't have been any others like that on this street.
And was that always the case? I mean, even in the early 20th century, did this place grow up around it and become more affluent?
Perhaps the owner would have hoped it might have, but unfortunately it didn't. It actually deteriorated. It was known as a slum area, in fact, when it came to the kind of 1920s and 30s.
Oh, really?
This actually became the red light district for Adelaide.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So, Julie, why do you believe it was built in such a grand manner?
Well, it certainly is a very elaborate piece of architecture, and it wouldn't have been out of place in the high end of town. But here, it's really a bit of a puzzle.
So there was no reverse gentrification of this area. The house has always been in a class of its own. I need to find out why. I've come to the city archives to view the rate books, which record precise changes to the structure of a property. I need to find out when and for what purpose Lois and Donald's house was built.
Well, this is interesting. Lois and Donald told me that they thought the house was built in about 1880 by the Cooper family. And my research takes it back to 1868, when it was owned by a guy called Robert Wilson, who was a grocer. So according to this document, the Coopers didn't even move into the property until 1895. But what's interesting is this entry that says an application to construct additions, including a shop, was made. So it seems before 1895, it was a family home, and after that date, the Coopers created what we see today. So we have a house that's older than we thought, built by people we've never heard of, with an extension that no one seems to know anything about. Well, it's clear that this place has got a lot more to it than is written on that plaque.
Now I'm back on the case of our mysterious medicine man, Muhammad Alum. I've invited Dr. Ian Musgrove, a pharmacologist, who has studied the remedies of the revered Alum, to explain more about his work.
So, Ian, we know that Muhammad had a number of different occupations, including a cameleer. How did he become a herbalist? I mean, did he learn his craft here, or did he bring that information with him?
He brought it with him. There's evidence that he was actually part of a tradition of herbalists within his family, and this form of herbal medicine was widely used through Afghanistan, where he lived.
What sort of things did people come for treatment for?
They came for all sorts of things. There was a whole range of therapies which we take for granted today, which have completely changed the face of medicine, that were just not available in his day.
Ian, what was his relationship with mainstream medicine?
Well, if I'm going to use one word, it would be confrontational. He was quite often brought up on charges of practising medicine without a licence.
So who charged him? Did the doctors charge him?
He was charged by the police. They put in an undercover detective to get him...
Entrapment.
Entrapment, yeah. They put in an undercover detective to go in and get a medicine prescribed, and then he was charged with practising medicine without a licence. And I believe he was ultimately fined £45.
The £45 is a lot of money.
That was a lot of money in those days, but again, he was a superstar herbalist, so he probably could have afforded that £45, but it was the principle of the thing.
The most famous of Muhammad Alum's herbal medicines was blackjack. Sadly, there isn't any in existence today.
Some cenopods, some diced licorice root.
But Ian has been researching and analysing this infamous remedy, and believes he can now replicate it once again, here in the kitchen where it was originally produced.
And here we are, we have our finished product.
Blackjack.
And so what would you be doing with that?
You would drink it.
Oh my goodness. Ian, what is this ungodly liquid supposed to do?
Well, this is a laxative.
Well, now you tell me.
What a fascinating insight into Muhammad Alum's work. But he wasn't the only herbalist in town. So what made him so special to be immortalised on a plaque? I'm going to need some local help here, so I've contacted an expert in Australian Muslim history. While I wait for her to get back to me, I'm turning my attention to that rumour Lois and Donald have heard about gypsies using their cellar for seances and other strange rituals.
Well, I can understand why Lois and Donald are intrigued by the gypsy ceremonies. I mean, it's tantalising, isn't it? And they recall that the Gypsy Tavern was in operation during the 1990s. Now, cross-referencing through these title deeds, there was only one occupier at that time, the Morrow family.
When I do a further search into the gypsy community, I find the Morrow name linked to a prominent Romany family here in Adelaide.
Hi, is that Wendy? Exactly, yep. Okay.
That's great news. I've managed to track down the owners of Nanyeta's Gypsy Tavern, and it sounds like they have some tantalising stories to share, particularly about that cellar. I now want to reveal to Lois and Donald what I've discovered about the early occupants of their home. I've managed to dig up some old photographs of the area and can now show them what their place looked like before it received its grand facelift.
Well, guys, I've got some great results from the research I've done on your house. I've got these brilliant shots of Sturt Street.
Oh, wow.
And they really illustrate that, you know, we were talking about the grand nature of your place and whether that was the same all along the street.
No.
Well, it's very industrial, very basic. I've actually got these beautiful shots here, which shows the place next door, which was known as Austin's Drapery.
Wow.
So you can recognise that, can't you?
recognise the front veranda, absolutely.
Now, I've got the same place photographed in 1890.
With no top.
Isn't that amazing?
So
What else do you recognise?
That's on this side.
Yeah.
That's your place.
Yeah.
This is how it was in 1890, your place.
Right.
A single-storey residence, but in actual fact, it was first built by a guy called Robert Wilson in 1867.
You're kidding.
No.
That's
making
amazing.
it a very, very early building.
Wow. In 1867. So how long had people been in... Like, that would have not been...
30 years.
Yeah. 30. Adelaide would be about 30 years old.
Yeah.
Is that right? Wow.
And Robert Wilson was not a chemist. John Cooper and Sons, he bought the place in 1895, and it was he that added the second story. So you can see he's got permission to add
story.
and a shop.
Oh, okay.
So he put the second story on and also created the shop
And that front window, yes.
And he was a chemist.
Okay. And he put the
symbol
mortar
up
and
the top.
pestle up the top.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing is, if you remember, 1890s, there was the Big Depression.
Yeah.
Yes.
Adelaide wasn't out of that depression in 1895. But what happened was, towards the end of it, when the light at the end of the tunnel was there, people who had the finances or had the ability could exploit cheap labour and cheap materials and speculate, essentially. And that's what John Cooper did.
Right.
But he also, I think, was building a legacy because both his sons, Ernest and Sidney, also went into the chemist's trade.
Sidney Cooper.
Sidney Cooper. And Sidney, in his spare time, was a very well-accomplished tenor singer.
Oh, tenor.
And he actually performed with Dame Nellie Melba.
You're kidding.
No.
There you go. And it is a hymn.
Yes,
as
it is a
turns
hymn.
out.
Chemist by day, opera singer
singer by
by night.
The idea that Sidney Cooper sang with Dame Millie Melba, that's
the icing on the cake.
That is the icing on the cake, isn't it? I sort of wondered who he was, and now I know. Thank you very much, Adam.
Absolute pleasure. It has been a real pleasure.
No, that's been fantastic.
Yeah.
I've heard back from Hanifa Dean, an authority on the Muslim community here in Adelaide. She's researched Muhammad Alum, so I'm hoping she can give Lois and Donald a true insight into the man behind the myth.
How lucky you are to be living in his house.
Oh, we think so, but tell us more.
Well, he was an outstanding character. I see him as sort of the spin doctor of his era during the latter part of his years in Adelaide. And he dressed flamboyantly, suits with lots of showy jewellery and so on. And people were just drawn towards him.
Muhammad Alam, called by thousands of grateful patients the Wonder Man from Kandahar, is a father at 83.
Late in life, he married a 20-year-old Australian woman. Now, so the magnetism of him, was it his wealth? I'm not sure, but there must have been some mystique around him. Maybe he was the Umar Sharif of his period, or Rudy Valentino type of guy.
More than 600 people a week visit him at his Adelaide home. Although he treats hundreds without payment, Muhammad is wealthy, as the diamonds indicate.
How long did he live, Hanifa?
I think it was about 107. Now, you can put that down to, herbal remedies.
Well, that's it. Maybe that's it.
When he died, his funeral procession, there were thousands of people who followed his procession, who mourned the loss of this man. And remember, there were only a handful of Muslims, so we're talking about ordinary people.
Wow.
Who respected this man, respected Haji Muhammad Alam.
I've been looking in the state archives, and the description of Muhammad in there is a very different and darker version that you're telling. Who's the real Muhammad?
I think what you saw in Adelaide was the culmination of his career. When he had the wealth, when he had what he wanted, he had respect from a society. Before, he had to struggle very hard. Also, now that he was settled here, he became a philanthropist. He was, as well as treating poor people for nothing and using other patients who could afford it to subsidise that treatment, he gave away money to the needy and so on. Adelaide loved him, and I think he loved Adelaide.
I have one last surprise for Lois and Donald. I've traced the owners of Nanyetta's Gypsy Tavern. This was also Wendy Murrow and her husband Scott's home. It's been 10 years since they were last here.
Driven past, never coming.
How do you feel to be back now?
It's really surreal.
It is.
How many people lived here?
Way too many.
It was a big extended family.
Was it all family?
Yeah, at one stage it was all family, and then there was other times where there was other Roma that came from overseas, and that we would also house them upstairs as well.
We did a lot of work with refugees and assisting them to find a place to live. So often when they were waiting for somewhere to live, we'd house them upstairs. Yep. So, yeah.
How long were you running the tavern?
12 years.
12 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to say, they were the best 12 years of my life. I think that, the really exciting part about the restaurant was the way it brought people together, and that was really, really important to us.
And there's yet another amazing link to the healing traditions associated with this home.
So your mum was a naturopath or a herbalist as well, were you saying?
Yes.
And so did she know Muhammad Alam while he was still alive?
Look, she used to tell us about how she actually worked with him for a while. She started out as a patient, but my mum being, the type of person that she is, she couldn't just be treated. She needed to learn and know more, and we were one of the original family businesses in natural medicine.
Did she have any sort of remedies that she got from him that you know of? Or?
We had plenty of really gross ones.
How
Now, there's a story that Lois and Don have told me about, and I've got to ask you. There's a rumour that there were gypsy ceremonies that took place in the cellar.
Ceremonies? No. Tarot reading.
In the cellar.
In the cellar, yeah. As a part of the restaurant, short tarot readings for, I think it was $5, wasn't it?
Yeah, palm readings.
Yeah, like palm readings and things like that. And if you wanted a longer reading, the restaurant was just too noisy. So people would go down into the cellar where it was actually a lot quieter.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It was a great add-on to the whole restaurant theme. You know, what goes on down there. And so the stories and the rumours grow. And
A little bit of mystery and a little bit of romance never goes astray.
Never goes astray.
It's a fascinating and colourful story, and thank you so much for coming back and telling us all about it.
Yeah. No, it was an amazing time of our lives, I think.
There's so much happened here, and it feels more part of the community than I understood. I always knew it was special, but now I kind of think that it's got real roots that I understand better.
Oh, Muhammad Alam, that really resonates incredibly strongly for me in terms of someone who made it their own way, but was quite willing to give back to the community.
We named the house Alchemy a little while ago, not quite knowing all of that, and it just now seems the perfect name for a place like this. A little bit of science and a little bit of magic.
This house not only stands out on Sturt Street, it has stood proud throughout the long history of this community. And as we've discovered, its remarkable past is more than just names and dates on a wall. If Lois and Donald really want to do this place justice, they're going to have to get a bigger plaque.